Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. You know my buddy Teddy. I don't know if he's going to stay very long because Joel is in the kitchen cooking. He's actually working on Christmas cookie doughs and things like that. So Teddy has been very interested in what's been going on in the kitchen, but I managed to steal him for a moment to start a Friday Reads video where I talk about the week in reading and wrap up just what I've read and anything else interesting that has gone on during the week. We are mostly going to spend this video talking about what I've read this week because not too much has happened. It's been a bit of a quiet week. And for anyone new, I will also have a link down below with like a timestamp so you can check out or jump to the Friday Reads portion if you need. And Teddy is actually already super interested in what's going on in the kitchen, so I'm just going to put him down and let him go. But at least you got to see him. He has been doing very well this week and continues to just be a very good boy, and we are delighted to have him. That's your Teddy update. So the timestamp down below will sort of skip you to the Friday Reads portion of the video if that's what you are here for and would like to do. But I can guarantee this part where I just sort of chat is going to be a little short this week. So not much happened this week. It's been kind of quiet, intentionally so. I only put one video out since my last Friday Reads video, and that was my monthly reading wrap up for the month of November with Joel. Because I kind of needed a bit of a break when it comes to videos. There were just a couple in a row that really needed fast turnaround time because the New York Times released this 100 notable list and I had to react to it. I didn't have to, I just wanted to. Same with their top 10 list from the book review. The Booker Prize was announced. There were a lot of things in a row that needed to be very quickly filmed, edited, and posted. So I decided I wanted a break this week. And it was lovely. So I have finished one book this week. I'm almost done with another one, and I'm kind of thinking about what I'm going to do next. We'll talk about all of that in a moment. The only other thing to mention is I had said in my last Friday Reads video that there might not be a Friday Reads video this week because I needed to have a little mole on my eyelid removed. So I did have that done yesterday, and at first I really didn't think I was going to be able to film a Friday Reads video at all, but I kind of waited it out and it got better. So there's still a little bit of swelling and there's a scab, but it's fine. Pay no attention to it. But yesterday it was really swollen. Like there was a portion of the day where my eye was actually swollen shut, but it's doing a lot better. So I felt like I could do a Friday Reads, and I'm glad that I'm going to be able to do it because I have a lot to talk about when I get to the actual bookish part, which is again going to be very quickly. First, let's talk about my t-shirt, which I am delighted about. It is a Golden Girls Christmas t-shirt. So you have Dorothy, a Christmas tree, and Shady Pines Ma. I absolutely love it. I got Joel one as well. If I had to get him the Blanche one, we each got one for our favorite character. My favorite character is Dorothy because she's my spirit animal, and his favorite character is Blanche. They also have ones for Rose and Sophia. I'll put a link down to the Etsy shop where we got these down below because just a delight. I don't know if they would get to you before Christmas, if that's what you want them for, but I'm very happy to have this. I love it. It makes me smile to think about, so that's it. Teddy actually came back into the room, but I don't think he would want to do a whole video. I think he wants the freedom to run and check out what's happening in the kitchen. So let's just move to the Friday Reads portion of the video. The only book that I actually finished this month was The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. This was one of my most anticipated books of the year. I've been on a bit of a roller coaster with James McBride, up and then a kind of not really a down, but more toward the middle. So I absolutely love The Good Lord Bird by James McBride. A fantastic book. If you have not read it, I would highly recommend it. And Deacon King Kong, which is next to it on that shelf, I was a little muted on. And I think that was actually beneficial for the Heaven and Earth Grocery Store because even as people were very excited about this book, I was able to go in with measured expectations, because sometimes when you get really hyped to read a book, the book will end up suffering because of that. And I think I really got around that because even after people started really getting excited about this book and loving this book, and it started showing up on lots and lots and lots of year-end best lists, it didn't make the New York Times top 10, which I'll link down below. And I am still honestly floored that it did not. But even with all of that happening, I was able to go in and feel like the expectations hadn't been set too high. So I really liked this book. And actually, this is fortuitous because there is one little quibble that I have with it. And Roro Reads did a video just last night about the Heaven and Earth grocery store with a review. And I finished this book last night as I'm filming this and watched Roro Reads' video and felt very validated because the one little quibble that he had with the book is the same quibble that I had. And so I'll link his video down below if you'd like to check that out. Delightful channel, really great book reviews if you are unfamiliar. But so let's talk about what the book is about first, and then I'll talk about the quibble a little bit. So this is a novel that is very much about community, specifically in the town of Pottstown, Pennsylvania, mostly in the 1930s, but there is a framing device from 1972. The book opens in 1972 and ends in 1972, and the rest is the 1930s in this community, where there are a lot of people who have been marginalized from the rest of the community. And when I say the rest, I mean the more acceptable white community in this town. And they have been sort of pushed into this part of the community called Chicken Hill. It started with some Jewish immigrants to the country in the area, and then a lot of black people moved in. There are also Italian immigrants. And some of the white immigrants are beginning to move out of the neighborhood. That is a very specific plot point. So you have this woman, Chona, who owns the Heaven and Earth grocery store. Her husband runs a theater. And in very subtle ways, it's a book that's about integration, assimilation, but also the creation of community. It's about the problems of creating a community and a sense of community when you have such differences from person to person among a community. But it's also about how beautiful it is when you create that sense of togetherness in an area. And I think that's one of the things that I really love about this book. But Chona's husband owns the theater, and one of the subtle messages about integration is that he starts to realize that he can bring black musicians to his theater and do just as well and become very successful catering to the black members of his own community and putting on events for them. And of course, it gets him some criticism from other white people who just don't like the elements that he's bringing into the town. And as they begin to make money, he wants to pick up and move to the nicer neighborhood and get away from where they have been living. But his wife, Chona, refuses. She wants to stay where they are living above the Heaven and Earth grocery store and remain part of this community. And she is this really wonderful character who sort of drives the story. I would say she is the heart of the book. She's also the spine of the book. And she's wonderful. If you have ever heard any other booktuber or reviewer talk about how great Chona is as a character, absolutely. So that's the premise of the book. But the framing device is kind of where I have my quibble and where Roro Reads had his quibble with the book. The opening in 1972 is that during construction, a crew finds a skeleton down a well. It's been there for a very long time. There are some clues next to the body about who may have put that skeleton down in this well. And then the book goes back to the 1930s and spins out. And then it circles back to that skeleton again at the end. And because that is the framing device, you are set up for a sort of mystery to be taking place in the book. And I think that emphasizes the wrong thing, because you start to play things out in your head that ultimately are not actually important. And I'm not going to get into spoilers on it, but I did this, and Roro Reads did this as well. You start to speculate as you go through the book. Okay, who is the victim going to be? Who is the skeleton at the bottom of the well? And then not only that, you're sort of playing with the idea of who committed the murder, who put this person at the bottom of the well. And you start to think, okay, this seems like the person, but what if James McBride is faking me out? Because that's what mysteries do. So that would be too easy. It's got to be this person, or maybe this person, or somebody I'm not thinking of. Point is being, you really go all in on the identity of the person in the well. And ultimately, that's actually not that important. The whole mystery element is just a framing device for this story about a community and a place and a people that is otherwise really beautiful. And I think that's the only sort of clumsy element about it. So when I finished this book last night, I said to myself, okay, I know I liked it, but I have this issue with the framing device. You know what? I'm going to sit on it and I'm going to sleep on it. and think about it in the morning. I didn't even rate the book on Storygraph when I finished because I was like, you know what, I need to digest a little bit. So I thought about it a little bit before going to bed last night, and then when I woke up, I said, you know what, Greg, it's a good book. Get over it. It's fine. Yes, I think the framing device is a little bit clumsy, and I think it puts emphasis on the wrong thing in the book. However, it's a great book. And it's just funny that that is the same conclusion that Roa Reeds came to. And ultimately, I did really love this book. This is sort of my Demon Copperhead for this year. If you remember, if you follow along, Demon Copperhead was my favorite read from last year. I think both of these books have a very similar soul. They are bringing up and addressing the need to address pretty systemic problems in American society. And they are sort of grappling with them, and in a lot of ways they can seem futile because there's a lot going on. They're very difficult things to address, but the book has a very palpable sense of hope and love for community. It's very similar to what I found in Demon Copperhead. I know there are people who didn't find the same sense of hope and optimism that I did in Demon Copperhead, but I see this, I did get that, and I see the same elements here at work by James McBride, and it resonates very powerfully with me because I really love these messages where it's addressing something very serious, but there's a sense of hope as well. I kind of need that sense of hope. It helps me get by. You will always be surprised by how terrible people are, but you will always be surprised by how wonderful people can be. And I like things that sort of address that dynamic. You know, we can frequently be at our worst, but we can also frequently be at our best. And Demon Copperhead gets that. The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store gets that, because this is a book about community and love of community, and how difficult it is to form that sense of community when you have all of these immigrant groups and people who have been marginalized. So in Pottstown, can't remember if I mentioned this or not, there are people who have been marginalized in one area, and there are lots of different backgrounds, but it's very difficult for them to form a sense of community. But when they do, everything is so good and powerful, and they're so strong as a community when they are together. Individually, they can start to despair and feel alone and get overwhelmed by the difficulties of life. But when they are together, when they don't judge each other based on their differences, they are powerful and can do a lot and achieve a lot. And I really found that to be a very resonant message, at least for me. And I know for a lot of other people who have absolutely loved this book. This is a book about the importance of community. And it is also very much about America. I started taking notes. I had to pivot away. I started with a bookmark for this book, and I had to switch to an index card so I could take notes as I was working my way through. And one thing I like to do when I'm taking notes with a book is notice recurring things. It's just a weird quirk of mine. I like noticing how things repeat. And America is a sort of repetition throughout this book, and the American dream is a repetition throughout this book. So I started noting down instances where that happened, or pages where that was referred to. And this is a book that deals heavily with immigrants, Jewish immigrants, Italian immigrants, Irish immigrants, and also deals with Black communities that didn't necessarily choose to immigrate to the United States. It was sort of forced on them, and now they are in this country where they are sort of at the bottom rung of what is deemed to be acceptable in society, and are trying to make their own way in the world, and again, in very resonant ways. And it's, again, about seeing past those differences that you create and which can be sort of artificial, because I talked about this with a recent book. When you create the concept of an immigrant, you also create the concept of an other. And this is a book about people struggling with those differences, but also overcoming those differences and creating a sense of community in really beautiful and powerful ways. Chona, who owns the Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, is an absolutely wonderful character. She is the heart of this book. She is also the spine of this book. She is this strong woman who is a first-generation American raised by Jewish immigrants. And she loves this community. She takes care of this community. And this book has a very palpable adoration for Chona and the way she fights for her community and fights to make it better. And she's just a really wonderful character. And James McBride is a wonderful writer for understanding all of these elements and sort of bringing them together in one book. I absolutely have loved this book and would recommend it to you. It is interesting, though, because I read this in print. I read The Good Lord Bird in print, which is very different. It doesn't have that sprawling community cast of characters that you find in Deacon King Kong and in the Heaven and Earth grocery store. I listened to Deacon King Kong on audio, and it has that sprawling cast of characters. There are a lot of storylines going on. And ultimately, by the end, it started to feel a little bit muddy to me, like there was a little too much going on. So when I was planning to read The Heaven and Earth grocery store, I originally was going to listen to the audio. And then I thought, this seems to be a book in the same mold as Deacon King Kong. And since I struggled a little bit with the audio of Deacon King Kong, I should try the physical book this time around. And I know a lot of people have said that the audio production of the Heaven and Earth grocery store is really great, but I found that to be a much more successful reading experience for me. And it is interesting because Joel is actually reading this right now as well. He's listening to the audio. And he has said, as we've been talking about the book, that there's a great narrator. It's really keeping him engaged in the story, but at the same time, he's having that same struggle where there are so many characters, there's so many little storylines and things going on that he is having a little bit of trouble, not keeping track necessarily, but it is starting to feel a little overwhelming. And I think for me, reading the physical book got me around that problem really well. So I would say maybe just keep that in mind. If that is something that you think you would do better with the book, don't do the audio. But I know a lot of people have commented and said that they've had good luck with the audio. So I can't tell you which is the right choice for you. For me, I think it was much better and much more successful to read the physical book. But your mileage may vary. So this is an absolutely wonderful book. I really, with one caveat, hope that this ultimately wins the Pulitzer Prize for fiction this year. It's difficult because there are so many heavy hitters this year that could be contenders for the Pulitzer Prize, and sometimes the Pulitzer Prize likes to surprise you by having a list of finalists and a winner that are at least a little more obscure. I think of the Netanyahus, which was the winner not this year but last year, and so it's kind of hard to predict. We could get a winner that is a little lesser known. There are too many big heavy hitters. We have Alice McDermott still in contention. We have Jesmyn Ward. We have James McBride. We have Daniel Mason, who I'm going to talk about in a moment. And that is actually the caveat. The caveat is that I have not read Northwoods yet. So my opinion about what I want to win the Pulitzer may end up changing. But to me, this would especially be a great follow-up to Demon Copperhead winning the Pulitzer, or co-winning the Pulitzer, because there was a tie last year or this year. And I would love to see this book win. First of all, I really think James McBride should have won a Pulitzer for The Good Lord Bird. So in a way, it would set things right if he ultimately wins for the Heaven and Earth grocery store. However, I'm not 100% on board with the idea of just like a makeup prize. Like, hey, sorry we didn't give it to you for what you deserved it for. Let's just give it to you for this. I think that's kind of what happened to Louise Erdrich. And the book that she won for ultimately kind of, I think, didn't hold up to the rest of her work. Not the case with James McBride. If James McBride wins for the Heaven and Earth grocery store, he will have won for a worthy book. And because the Pulitzer is so concerned with an American author, preferably for a book that deals with American life, the preferably can mean that you have a lot of different interpretations of how American life should be represented, or if American life even needs to be represented at all. But because that is an element of the mission statement for the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, I just think this would be a really great winner. 1, for its message, 2, for its execution, and 3, for the fact that it is a very quintessentially American novel. And it deals with that in a very refreshing way, because it acknowledges being an American means a lot of different things. I think when you try to define something that is quintessentially American, it can be very difficult very quickly. That's why I don't think it's possible to name the great American novel, because America as a concept means so many different things, and there are so many things that should be represented in it. And I think this is a book that really acknowledges that, and I think that makes it very beautiful and very powerful. So I am right now fully in the camp of The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. My heart is rooting for him to win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. I have not decided what my prediction will be. Last year was interesting for me in the Pulitzer because my heart said Demon Copperhead should win. My head said Trust by Hernan Diaz would win, and they ended up tying. So that will never happen again. My heart says I want The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store to win right now. Again, I haven't read Northwoods, so I haven't read a whole... there's a huge competitor out there that I need to read as well. But I am having a hard time seeing any book coming ahead of this in my estimation for the Pulitzer. I think this would be an excellent winner for the Pulitzer Prize. And I really hope that it does end up winning. But we'll see. Like I said, there are a lot of contenders. And what's interesting is when it was announced that there was a new Jesmyn Ward book coming out, I really thought that she was going to be the one kind of coasting to a Pulitzer next year. And I think reception for Let Us Descend, her book, has been muted enough that she's very vulnerable. She could easily still win. But I think it's seeming more and more likely that she will have another chance. So I'm rooting for James McBride, The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. But again, I haven't read Northwoods yet, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. So Teddy fell asleep on the floor. I don't know if you can hear him snoring, but yeah, he is just fully asleep on the floor. I guess Joel must have gotten a work call because he went downstairs to his office. The other book that I have been reading this week is Of Time and Turtles, Mending the World, Shell by Shattered Shell by Cy Montgomery with illustrations by Matt Patterson. So I had actually been thinking that I would do something else as my next audio. However, Joel read this at the end of November and just really loved it. And if you saw our November wrap-up, you remember how much he loved this book. I'll have that video linked down below. And I want to shout out again this gorgeous cover of the book, and the illustrations by Matt Patterson inside are also really just absolutely stunning. So I am actually listening to this on audio because Cy Montgomery does such a good job reading her audios. She read the audio for The Soul of an Octopus, which is another absolutely fantastic book. I loved it. And so did Joel. I think when you listen to her, there's a very palpable enthusiasm and sense of wonder. So if you are someone who consumes audiobooks, I would definitely recommend going that route for her books. I really love the physical book of this as well because so much care went into the creation of this book, and the illustrations are beautiful, and it's really nice to have the photos that are in the book as well. So when they talk about Fire Chief or any of the other turtles, you can find photos of them and also of the people who are working at the Turtle Rescue League. So my understanding of this book was that Cy Montgomery went to work for the Turtle Rescue League after the pandemic, but she actually began her journey with them before the pandemic. And then, so she started talking to them about becoming an intern and spending time with the turtles and the people who work to rescue the turtles in 2019. And then as she was beginning her internship in 2020, the pandemic happened, and the book does chart that course. This is actually a really interesting book to have been listening to as I was reading The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, because this is a pandemic book in that she pretty openly discusses the sort of uncertainty that came with the early days of the pandemic and the early months of the pandemic, and how careful you had to be around the other people in your life, and how there was still work that needed to be done. So the people who worked at the Turtle Rescue League still needed to find ways to operate because there were still turtles that needed their help and they needed volunteers. So it is a pandemic book in a way, but it's also a very hopeful book. It's a book that deals with grief because obviously, tough time going on in the world at large. And anytime you deal with animals, there are some that you can help, there are some that you can save, there are some that you cannot, despite your best efforts. And this book has made me cry. There are instances where even a turtle that seemed to be doing well will all suddenly pass away. And it is heartbreaking. But at the same time, this is a book that gives you honesty and gives you love and hope. Again, calling back to the Heaven and Earth grocery store and Demon Copperhead. And it, even when it has those sad moments, it is reflective in a way that ultimately uplifts you and feels really beautiful. I am so blown away by Cy Montgomery, and I'm not even done with this book. I have a little over 3 hours left in the audio, and I can't wait to be done, because this is a truly, truly beautiful book. And I think it was something that my soul needed. And if you follow along, you know, Joel and I have had a tough 2-3 years. Everybody's had a tough 2-3 years, so I don't want to take that away from anybody. But, the pandemic. But, we had our dog Guinness, who got sick in 2021. We lost him in 2022, and then had to deal with the grief of that. And as we were just beginning to climb out of grief earlier this year, our dog Jameson got sick. And we spent months trying to care for her, and then lost her in August. Our foster son moved out at the end of 2021, and it seemed at the time that he just didn't want anything to do with us, and that was really difficult. We felt like failures because of that. So the only reason I bring that up is that, it's been a tough 2 or 3 years, and I think we're starting to feel a little more optimistic. The arrival of Teddy in October has helped tremendously. It's hard not to feel joy around Teddy, or to feel loved around him. He has been really good to sort of heal our souls around the trauma and grief of losing the other 2 dogs. And I think both Joel and I have felt really grateful for that. But I think I needed this sense of hope that Cy Montgomery is giving me in this book. And I wouldn't have identified that either. But this is a book that is resonating with my soul in a way that is very helpful, I think, and very profound. So hopefully I am feeling optimistic that we can begin 2024 on more positive footing. And we'll see how that goes. I'm not even done with this book, but I'm loving it. I'm absolutely loving this book. And I'm so grateful to Cy Montgomery for this cathartic experience that I am having, and this sort of emotional release that I am getting from this book. It feels very powerful. And again, what a combination of books to be reading at the same time, one in print and one on audio. It's ending 2023 in a positive space. How long is that going to last, though? I don't know, because I keep reminding myself 2024 is an election year in the United States, and I am primed for stress and anxiety, and it feels like a train wreck is coming. We'll see. So right now I'm feeling great, but we're going to have to wait and see how long that actually lasts. So what am I going to do next? I have 2 contenders for my next print book. I mentioned Daniel Mason. That is one of them, because I've been wanting to read this book a lot. And it's been, so Heaven and Earth Grocery Store and Northwoods feel like they are both among them racking up the majority of year-end best recommendations. I'd say maybe the Bee Sting is up there because it has been getting a lot. But certainly if you are obsessed with the Pulitzer Prize, like I am, which focuses on American authors, it's easier for me to focus on Heaven and Earth Grocery Store and Northwoods. So I feel like I need to read this. And I was just gifted a copy of this. I had some wonderful subscribers who gave some gifts to help me get a copy of the book. So I want to read this before the end of the year. So this is a contender to be my next print book. As I said, I finished the Heaven and Earth Grocery Store last night. But I'm thinking I'm going to squeeze another book in before I do Northwoods. And that is for a very specific reason. Color Purple, Alice Walker. So I have actually already read this, but a long time ago. I read this 20 years ago, somewhere around there. This is actually the copy of the book that I read 20 years ago. So I am getting ready for a Pulitzer Prize deep dive on this, and I have already started researching a little bit into Alice Walker, because Alice Walker is complicated. That's perhaps a generous way of putting it. Don't need to get into it now, But there's just a lot going on that you can have in a conversation with her. And, okay, let's just mention, like, she has recently defended J.K. Rowling. And if you look up the actual post that she made on her website in which she defended J.K. Rowling, it's bad. It's not good. Things that it says in it are really not great. She has also promoted and platformed anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, which is not great. But I remember loving The Color Purple. So there's going to be an interesting discussion to be had with this book. And I'm tempted to say, and I can't really say this with any authority until I reread the book, but I am tempted to say that this is one of those circumstances where it is possible to sort of separate the art from the artist, because my memory is that the difficult, thornier parts of Alice Walker are not present in this book, but I need to read the book again in order to properly grapple with that and, say it with any sense of authority, as I said. So I think I'm going to read this next, because the other thing, the reason I have a sense of urgency to do this Color Purple deep dive now is that the movie adaptation of the musical adaptation of The Color Purple is coming Christmas. So I would love to read this before the movie comes out, do a deep dive before the movie comes out, and then maybe after the movie comes out, I can do a book versus movie comparison where I cover both the 1985 movie and the adaptation of the musical. So I have thoughts and plans, and of course that requires me to reread the book. And the reason I'm thinking I'm going to squeeze this in before I read Northwoods is that this should be a quick read. So if you've never read The Color Purple before, it's an epistolary novel. So every chapter is a letter, and it's 251 pages. So it's not that long. But also the chapters are really short because they're letters. So as difficult as the subject matter of the book is, it should be very digestible to have those really short chapters and sort of power through, because it's 251 pages, but again, each chapter is very short. And if you are unfamiliar, the book is told in letters. In the first half, they are letters that a woman named Celie is addressing to God. And it's about her life, the traumas that she experiences, and her separation from her sister. And I remember absolutely loving the book. We shall see. So I think I'm going to squeeze this in before I do Northwoods, just because I think it should read very quickly. And then I will feel ready to have that Pulitzer Prize deep dive. I'll feel ready to watch the movie. What about audio, you may be asking yourself. You're probably not, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. So I looked at the other books that were finalists for the Pulitzer Prize the year that The Color Purple won. One of them has fallen into obscurity to a point where it is extremely difficult to get a copy of that book, and we'll talk about that when I eventually do my deep dive for The Color Purple. The other one is Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant by Anne Tyler. And Anne Tyler later won her own Pulitzer Prize for a book called Breathing Lessons. She was a finalist 3 times in the 1980s and won on her third. The third time really was the charm for Anne Tyler. I have heard so many good things about Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant over the years, and I'm very curious to read it. So I would like to read it, or use this as an excuse so I can say with at least some degree of authority that, weigh in about what should have won the Pulitzer that year. I won't really be able to weigh in about the other book because, like I said, it is really wildly faded into obscurity, but it is a very interesting book to talk about in my deep dive. So I think I'm going to do this on audio because I did get myself this copy. It's sort of a vintage paperback that I got from my local used bookstore for $2.48. And it is in good condition, but as I was holding it this morning, I feel like I'm going to break the spine if I read this. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to cash in a credit on Libro. Joel and I sort of collect our credits. Libro is a subscription service, and they give you a credit every month. So Joel and I have a tendency to sort of collect those until we are ready to read a book. So I have like a wish list, and then I might cash in one of those credits when I'm ready to read it. So I think I'm going to cash in a credit that we have saved to get the audio of Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant. So Color Purple will probably be my next book in print, and then I'll do this at the same time on audio, and then I will be ready to have a conversation about 1982 as a Pulitzer year, because Color Purple won the Pulitzer for 1983, but because the Pulitzer is announced the following year, it was 4 books that were published in 1982. And like Women of Brewster Place was published that year, so I will feel like I have a sense of the field once I do this one. So that's what I have going on. I thought this was going to be a fast video. Every time I say this is going to be a fast video, it is not a fast video at all. I kind of thought, well, I'm just going to come on and talk really quickly about the Heaven and Earth grocery store and get off, because I don't want people staring at my eye. But you know what? Ultimately, I have no sense of dignity or shame anyway. So if you've been staring at my eye the whole time, it's fine. It's fine. It is what it is. It's not that bad anyway. So that's what I've had going on this week. That's what I have planned for next week. I would love to hear what you have had going on. We did watch the Bake Off finale. I don't want to talk about it because I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but it was a good season. Didn't end the way I expected it to, but it was a good season anyway. So let me know what you've been reading, watching, anything. Oh, we watched The Holdovers. It was great. We watched Rustin. Coleman Domingo was great. Let me know what you've been up to. Let me just throw out more stuff. Anyway, let me know what you've been up to, reading, watching, anything. If you have thoughts about anything I've talked about, let me know in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.